The third bullet didn't take her life. It took her old life away. In the middle of a room filled with millionaires, crystal chandeliers, and a carpet worth more than her yearly salary, a poor young woman lay bleeding, her body wrapped around a rich man's 6-year-old son. People screamed. Security fired. Cameras flashed. But Lorenzo Caruso, one of the most powerful and feared men in New York, didn't look at the chaos. He dropped to his knees beside the girl. She wasn't family. She wasn't important. She was just a hotel waitress. Yet while paramedics struggled to stop the bleeding, he grabbed one of them by the collar and shouted a sentence that shocked the entire room. "Don't let her die. She's my wife now." Before we begin this powerful story of sacrifice, love, and unexpected destiny, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the biggest hearts come from the hardest lives. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Because before the bullets, before the diamonds, before she became Mrs. Caruso, Sarah Miller was just a tired girl trying to survive. New York City doesn't care if you're struggling. It only cares if you can keep moving. At 24 years old, Sarah worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and still worried every day about money. That Tuesday evening, she was working a double shift at one of the most expensive hotels on Fifth Avenue. The kind of place where the rich held charity events to help the poor, while wearing watches worth more than Sarah's entire life savings. Her feet ached inside her cheap black work shoes. Her back hurt. Her stomach was empty. She had skipped lunch to save $5. But none of that mattered. What mattered was rent. What mattered was her younger brother, Toby. Toby was 19 and had severe type 1 diabetes. Without proper insulin, he could end up in the hospital, or worse. And the good insulin wasn't cheap. Every tray Sarah carried, every glass she filled, every polite smile she forced, was for him. She moved through the grand ballroom quietly, almost invisible. That was part of the job. Good servers weren't noticed. Around her, wealthy guests laughed about vacation homes, designer renovations, and investment portfolios. Sarah kept her eyes down. Because comparing her life to theirs only hurt. Her apartment in Queens had a leaking ceiling. The heat worked when it felt like it. And she was already 2 weeks behind on rent. Table 4 needs champagne. "Move, Miller," her manager's voice whispered sharply through her earpiece. "On it," she said softly, lifting the heavy tray. She was tired. But quitting wasn't an option. Poor people didn't get to quit. As the evening continued, the room suddenly changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But the energy shifted, the way a room changes when someone powerful walks in. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Sarah glanced toward the entrance. A tall man stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored dark tuxedo. His expression was calm, but the air around him felt heavy, controlled, dangerous. Lorenzo Caruso. In the business world, he was known as a logistics tycoon. In private circles, people called him something else. A man you respected. Or a man you feared. Walking beside him was a small boy, no older than 6. The child held his father's hand tightly, his eyes wide and uneasy as cameras flashed around them. In his other hand, he carried a worn toy robot, the only normal thing in a world of wealth and security guards. Sarah noticed something that surprised her. Mr. Caruso's hand rested firmly on the boy's shoulder. Protective. Possessive. But not gentle. The boy looked nervous, like he didn't quite belong in this glittering world. Sarah went back to work, clearing plates and refilling glasses. Nearly 2 hours later, as she wiped down a table near the VIP section, she felt a small tug on her apron. She looked down. The little boy was standing there. Up close, he looked even more overwhelmed than before. "I dropped Optimus," he whispered, his voice shaky. Sarah glanced around quickly. The security team was distracted across the room. Somehow, the boy had wandered away. She crouched down carefully, her knees protesting, and spotted the toy under the tablecloth. She picked it up, dusted it off gently, and handed it to him. "There you go, buddy," she said with a warm smile. "Optimus is tough. He can handle a fall." The boy's face brightened. "My dad says I have to be tough too." Sarah's heart tightened. "You can be strong and still need help sometimes," she told him softly. "Even heroes have a team." For a moment, the boy just looked at her, like no one had ever spoken to him like that before. Then a deep voice spoke behind them. "Leo." Sarah stood up quickly. Lorenzo Caruso was standing there. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His eyes moved quickly, scanning, assessing, protecting. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said quietly. "He just dropped his toy." Lorenzo looked at the robot, then at Sarah. For a brief moment, his expression softened. "Thank you," he said. It was simple, polite, controlled. But there was something else in his eyes. Exhaustion. As he guided his son away, Sarah let out a slow breath. She checked the time. Just a little longer, she told herself. Finish the shift. Get the tips. Buy the insulin. She had no idea that within the next 15 minutes, money would stop mattering. Because across the ballroom, moving quietly through the crowd, a man in a waiter's uniform was walking toward the Caruso table. And Sarah was the only one who noticed something wasn't right. If you're listening right now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment when your heart told you something was wrong, even before your mind understood it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Because in the next moment, Sarah Miller would make a decision that would change her life forever. And it would begin with one small detail. The waiter wasn't carrying a tray, and his right hand was hidden inside his jacket. Sarah frowned. Something about the man's walk felt wrong. Waiters at the hotel were trained to move like shadows, slow, smooth, almost invisible. But this man wasn't gliding. He was cutting straight through the crowd, shoulders stiff, eyes locked ahead. Locked on the Caruso table. Her stomach tightened. Maybe he's new, she told herself. But then she noticed something else. He wasn't carrying a tray. Every server carried something. Drinks, plates, linens. Empty hands meant questions from management. The man's right hand stayed pressed inside his jacket. And then, as he stepped under the chandelier light, Sarah saw it. A thin black metal cylinder. A suppressor. Her breath caught. For a split second, her mind refused to understand what her eyes were seeing. This isn't happening. Not here. Not tonight. The orchestra swelled, filling the ballroom with music. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. No one else noticed. Sarah looked toward the Caruso table. Lorenzo was turned slightly, speaking to a city official. His security team stood around the perimeter, watching the crowd, not the staff. And Leo. Leo sat quietly in his chair, coloring on a small piece of paper, his toy robot beside him. The gunman was less than 10 feet away now. And he wasn't aiming at Lorenzo. He was aiming at the child. The realization hit Sarah like ice water. They're not trying to kill the father. They're trying to break him. For one frozen second, Sarah couldn't move. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Her hands trembled. Her mind filled with flashes. Toby sitting at the kitchen table, measuring insulin, their empty refrigerator. The rent notice taped to the door. If something happened to her, who would take care of him? The safe choice was to step back. To pretend she hadn't seen anything. To survive. That's what poor people did. They survived. But then she looked at Leo again. Small. Alone. trusting the world to keep him safe. And suddenly she saw Toby at 6 years old, clutching his stuffed dinosaur the night their parents died. Scared, helpless, waiting for someone to protect him. Sarah didn't think anymore. She moved. The water pitcher slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The crash disappeared beneath the orchestra's music. She kicked off her shoes and ran. Her socks slid across the polished floor, but she didn't slow down. "No!" she screamed. The sound cut through the music like a knife. Lorenzo turned. The gunman raised the weapon. Sarah threw herself forward. She didn't reach the shooter. She couldn't. But she reached Leo. And she did the only thing her heart told her to do. She wrapped her arms around the boy and turned her back toward the gun. The first shot hit her shoulder. The impact felt like a hammer made of fire. The force spun her sideways, but she held on, pulling Leo tighter against her chest. The second bullet tore through her stomach. This one stole her breath. Heat spread through her body as her knees buckled. But she didn't let go. She curled around the child, covering his head, pressing his face into her uniform. "Don't look," she whispered, blood already filling her mouth. "It's okay. I've got you." The third bullet struck her lower back. For a moment, there was silence. Then the world exploded. Guests screamed. Glass shattered. Security opened fire. The attacker dropped before he even hit the ground. But Sarah didn't see any of it. Her vision had turned red. Her body felt heavy, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Underneath her, Leo was shaking. His small hands clutched her apron. She tried to speak again, but only a weak breath came out. "Stay down," she thought. "Stay safe." Footsteps thundered toward them. Then strong hands pulled her gently to the side. "Leo!" Lorenzo's voice broke through the chaos, raw and desperate. "Leo, are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Papa," the boy sobbed. "It's her. She saved me." Lorenzo looked down. The young waitress lay on the ballroom floor, her white uniform soaked dark with blood. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were struggling to focus. For a moment, the powerful man who controlled half the city looked completely helpless. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey, stay with me," he said, his voice lower now, almost careful. "What's your name?" Her lips moved. "Sarah." Her chest struggled for air. "My brother," she whispered. "He needs insulin." Even now, even with her life slipping away, she wasn't thinking about herself. Sirens wailed in the distance. Paramedics rushed in, pushing through security. One of them checked her pulse, his expression tightening. "She's losing too much blood," he said quickly. "We need to move her now." They lifted her onto a stretcher. Lorenzo stood there for one heartbeat, staring at the blood soaking into the expensive carpet beneath his shoes. Then something inside him changed. His eyes hardened. His voice turned cold. "Where are you taking her?" "County Hospital," the medic answered. "Closest trauma center for unidentified civilians." County. Overcrowded halls. Limited staff. Patients' waiting hours. For someone this critical, it was a gamble. Lorenzo stepped closer. And when he spoke, the entire room seemed to go quiet. "No," he said. The medic hesitated. "Sir, protocol." Lorenzo grabbed the front of his vest. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. "You don't let her die." The medic froze. Because the look in Lorenzo Caruso's eyes wasn't fear. It was something far more dangerous. And then he said the words that would change Sarah Miller's life forever. "She goes to the best surgeons in this city," Lorenzo said slowly. "Because she isn't a waitress." He leaned closer. "She's my wife now." For a second, No one moved. The paramedic stared at him, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I'm sorry, sir. Your wife?" he asked carefully. Lorenzo didn't repeat himself. He released the man's vest slowly, his gaze steady, unblinking. "You heard me," he said. "She is Mrs. Caruso, and you will treat her like her life is worth everything." There was no shouting, no threats, but the tone in his voice left no room for argument. The medic swallowed. "We'll reroute to New York Presbyterian." "Call ahead," Lorenzo added. "Tell them to prepare their best trauma team. I want Dr. Rossi." "That's a private surgeon, sir." "He doesn't." "I didn't ask what he does," Lorenzo interrupted quietly. "I told you what he will do." The stretcher began moving. As the paramedics rushed Sarah toward the exit, Lorenzo walked beside her, one hand gripping the rail. Leo clung to his other arm, his small face pale and streaked with tears. "Papa, is she going to die?" the boy whispered. Lorenzo looked down at Sarah. Her breathing was shallow. Her lips had turned almost gray. For the first time in years, he didn't have control. But his voice stayed calm. "No," he said. "She's not." They reached the ambulance doors. As they lifted Sarah inside, her hand slipped weakly off the stretcher. Without thinking, Lorenzo caught it. Her fingers were cold, small, fragile, so different from the world he lived in. "You don't get to leave," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You saved my son. Now you stay." The doors slammed shut. The ambulance pulled away, sirens cutting through Manhattan traffic. Inside, the paramedics worked quickly. 4 lines, oxygen, pressure on the wounds. Outside, Lorenzo stood motionless for a long moment. Blood stained his cuff, his sleeve, the front of his shirt. Not his blood. Hers. Leo tugged at his hand. "She told me heroes need help sometimes," the boy said in a small voice. Lorenzo looked down at him. Then he crouched, placing both hands gently on Leo's shoulders. "She helped you," he said. "Now we help her." Leo nodded. For the first time that night, he didn't look afraid. He looked determined. The drive to the hospital felt longer than it should have. By the time Lorenzo arrived, the trauma team was already waiting. Sarah was rushed straight through double doors under bright surgical lights. 3 gunshot wounds, a nurse reported quickly. Massive blood loss. BP dropping. Dr. Rossi appeared moments later, already pulling on gloves. He glanced at Lorenzo once. "Is this your wife?" the surgeon asked. "Yes." There was no hesitation in Lorenzo's answer. Dr. Rossi nodded. "Then I'll do everything I can." The doors closed. And suddenly, the noise was gone. The hallway fell quiet. Lorenzo stood there, staring at the red light above the operating room. He had faced business wars, rival threats, police investigations, betrayal from men he trusted. None of it had ever made him feel like this. Powerless. Leo sat beside him in a chair, holding his robot tightly. "Papa," he asked softly after a while, "why did she do it?" Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, he didn't understand it either. In his world, people protected what was theirs. Their family. Their money. Their power. No one took bullets for strangers. But she had. Finally, he spoke. "Because she has a good heart," he said. Leo looked at the operating room doors. "I like her," he whispered. Hours passed. The hospital quieted as night turned into early morning. Lorenzo hadn't moved. The blood on his sleeve had dried. His phone rang several times. Messages came in. Calls from business associates, from security, from people who wanted updates. He ignored them all. Nothing mattered right now except the girl fighting for her life behind that door. Near dawn, a man in a dark coat approached quietly. "James." He stood beside Lorenzo without speaking for a moment. Then he handed him a folder. "I ran a background," James said quietly. "Sarah Miller. 24. Lives in Queens. No criminal record. No family except a younger brother." Lorenzo opened the folder. Medical bills. Overdue rent notices. Work schedules showing 80-hour weeks. "She works 2 jobs," James continued. "Brother's diabetic. Severe case. She's been paying for his treatment herself." Lorenzo stared at the paperwork. The last thing she had said. "My brother, he needs insulin." Even while dying, she was thinking about someone else. "She has no one else?" Lorenzo asked. "No," James said. "If she doesn't make it, there's no one waiting for her." That hit harder than the rest, because it meant something simple. If she died, the world would move on like she never existed. At that moment, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Rossi stepped out, removing his mask. Lorenzo stood immediately. The surgeon looked exhausted. For a second, he didn't speak. And in that silence, even Lorenzo Caruso felt fear. Then Dr. Rossi nodded slowly. "She's alive." Lorenzo let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "But," the doctor continued, "it was close. She lost a lot of blood. We had to remove her spleen. 1 bullet damaged her shoulder badly. The 3rd came very close to her spine." Lorenzo's expression hardened. "Will she recover?" Dr. Rossi hesitated. "She'll live," he said. "But the recovery won't be easy. There may be nerve damage. She might have trouble walking for a while. Maybe longer." Leo stepped forward. "Can we see her?" the boy asked. Dr. Rossi gave a small smile. "She's in a medically induced coma for now. We'll wake her in about 24 hours. The boy nodded, relieved just to know she was still there. As the doctor walked away, James leaned closer to Lorenzo. "There's another issue," he said quietly. Lorenzo didn't look at him. "What?" "The press," James said. "Your statement at the ballroom is everywhere. Every news channel. Social media. Everyone's asking the same question." Lorenzo finally turned his head. "What question?" James held his gaze. "They want to know when you got married." Lorenzo was silent for a moment. Then he looked through the glass window into the ICU room where Sarah lay, pale and still, machines breathing for her. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. "Then we give them an answer." He straightened slowly. "Call the judge," he said. "Tonight." James blinked. "You're serious?" Lorenzo's eyes never left Sarah. "She saved my son," he said quietly. Then his voice turned colder. "And if the world believes she belongs to me, no one will dare touch her again." Behind the glass, Sarah didn't move. She didn't know that while she fought to wake up, her life was already being rewritten. Morning came quietly, the way it always does in hospitals. Soft light filtered through the blinds. Machines hummed. Nurses moved with calm efficiency. Inside the private ICU room, Sarah lay still, her body wrapped in bandages, tubes running from her arms, a monitor keeping steady rhythm beside her. She looked small in the bed. Fragile. Nothing about her said hero. Outside the glass, Lorenzo stood with his hands in his pockets, watching her the way a man watches something he doesn't fully understand. James approached slowly. "The judge signed it," he said in a low voice. "Marriage certificate is official as of yesterday." Lorenzo nodded once. "And the hospital? They've listed you as next of kin." There was a pause. James hesitated before speaking again. "You know this isn't just paperwork anymore," he said carefully. "Once the families hear about it, once the world accepts it, she's part of your life." Lorenzo didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on Sarah. "She already is," he said quietly. Behind the glass, her chest rose and fell slowly with the help of the ventilator. A woman who had nothing. A woman who had never asked for anything. Now she was connected to a world that never let people leave once they stepped inside. Later that afternoon, Leo sat in the chair beside her bed. His legs didn't reach the floor. His toy robot rested in his lap. He studied her face for a long time. "Papa," he asked softly, "does she hear us?" "Sometimes people do," Lorenzo said. Leo leaned closer. "Hi," he whispered. "It's me, Leo." He waited. Nothing changed. The machines kept their steady rhythm. "You saved me," the boy continued, his small voice serious. "So I'm going to stay here until you wake up." "That's fair." Lorenzo looked at him. For the first time in a long while, there was something warm in his expression. Because loyalty like that, it didn't come from wealth. It came from love. That evening, Sarah's world began to move again. At first, it wasn't sight or sound. It was pain. A deep, heavy ache, like her body didn't belong to her anymore. Then came the sounds. Beeping. Air moving through a machine. Footsteps. Voices somewhere far away. Her eyelids felt heavy, but she forced them open. The light hurt. Everything was blurry. Shapes moved. A figure leaned closer. "Easy," a calm voice said. "You're safe." Safe. The word didn't make sense. Then memory came back all at once. The ballroom. The boy. The gun. The burning pain. Her heart rate jumped on the monitor. "Leo," she whispered, her voice rough. The figure beside her straightened. "He's okay," Lorenzo said. Sarah blinked, trying to focus. The room wasn't like any hospital she had ever seen. The ceiling was high. Fresh flowers stood on a table. Soft light filled the space. Then her eyes found him. Lorenzo Caruso stood beside her bed. Not in a tuxedo now. Just a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, his expression tired but steady. "You're in a private ICU," he said. "You've been in surgery. You're going to be here for a while." Sarah tried to move. Pain shot through her body. Her breath caught. "Don't," he said quietly. "You took 3 bullets." The words hit her slowly. 3. She swallowed. "My brother," she whispered. "Toby. He needs his insulin. I didn't call him." Lorenzo didn't hesitate. "He's taken care of." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "He's in a private clinic," Lorenzo said. "New treatment plan. Full monitoring. Everything paid for." Sarah blinked. Her mind struggled to process the words. That's expensive," she said weakly. "Yes. Why would you do that?" Lorenzo held her gaze. "Because you saved my son." She stared at the ceiling for a moment. Toby was safe. For the first time in years, she didn't have to calculate money in her head. Didn't have to wonder what bill could wait. Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. There was silence between them. Then Sarah noticed something else. Her left hand felt heavier. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. A diamond ring sat on her finger. Large. Bright. Impossible. Her brow tightened. "What is this?" Lorenzo didn't look away. "It's your wedding ring." The words didn't register. "My what?" "You're my wife," he said calmly. For a moment, Sarah thought the medication was making her hallucinate. She gave a weak, confused laugh. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Her heart rate spiked again. I never got married, she said. I don't even know you. Lorenzo stepped a little closer. At the hospital, he said, I told them you were my wife so they would give you the best care. She stared at him. That was just to help you, he continued. But the situation changed. What situation? His expression hardened slightly. The man who shot you wasn't random, he said. Someone sent him. And now you're a witness. The room suddenly felt colder. If you go back to your old life, Lorenzo said quietly, you won't be safe. Her throat went dry. What are you saying? I'm saying, he answered, that the only way to protect you is for the world to believe you belong to me. Sarah looked at the ring again, then back at him. You made it real? Yes. The weight of the words settled slowly. She had gone to work one night as a waitress. Now she was lying in a private hospital room, married to one of the most powerful men in New York. Her voice trembled. You didn't even ask me. Lorenzo didn't deny it. No, he said. There was silence. The machines beeped steadily between them. Finally, Sarah asked the only question that mattered. What happens to me now? Lorenzo's answer came without hesitation. You heal. He looked at the ring on her hand. And then you come home with us. Outside the room, Leo pressed his face against the glass, watching them. And inside, Sarah suddenly realized something that made her chest tighten. She hadn't just survived the bullets. She had stepped into a life she might never be able to leave. Sarah lay awake long after Lorenzo left the room. The machines kept their steady rhythm, but her mind wouldn't slow down. Married. The word didn't feel real. She turned her hand slightly, watching the diamond catch the soft hospital light. It looked heavy. Too heavy for someone who used to count coins before buying groceries. This kind of ring belonged to women who had security. Women who didn't worry about rent. Women whose lives were planned. Not someone like her. Someone who had spent the last few years living paycheck to paycheck, praying Toby's blood sugar wouldn't crash in the middle of the night. The door opened quietly. Sarah looked up. Leo stepped inside, holding his robot against his chest. He moved slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. When he reached the bed, he stopped and looked at her carefully. You woke up, he said. His voice was soft, but there was relief in it. Sarah managed a small smile. Hi, Leo. For a moment, the boy just stared at her, as if making sure she was really there. Then he climbed onto the chair beside the bed. Does it hurt? He asked. A little, she said honestly. Leo nodded, thinking about that. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sarah frowned. For what? Because you got hurt saving me. Her heart tightened. She shifted her hand slowly and placed it over his small fingers. You didn't hurt me, she said gently. A bad man did. Leo looked down. Papa says everything is his fault. Sarah watched his face carefully. Children understood more than adults thought. Sometimes bad things happen even when people try their best, she said softly. That doesn't mean it's anyone's fault. Leo didn't answer right away. Then he held up the robot. I kept Optimus with me, he said. So you wouldn't be alone. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The door opened again. Lorenzo stood there, watching them. For a moment, he didn't speak. The sight of his son sitting beside the woman who had nearly died protecting him, it did something to him that business victories never could. Leo, he said quietly, it's time. The boy hesitated. Then he leaned closer to Sarah. I'll come back tomorrow, he promised. I'll be here, she said. Leo nodded and walked back to his father. As Lorenzo turned to leave, his eyes met Sarah's. There was no warmth in his expression. But there was something else. Responsibility. That night, Sarah didn't sleep much. The pain came in waves. Nurses checked her often. Medication dulled the edges, but it couldn't quiet her thoughts. By morning, a physical therapist arrived. "Let's see what your legs can do," the woman said kindly. Sarah tried. The moment she shifted her weight, fire shot through her lower back. Her knees trembled. Her body didn't respond the way she expected. She sank back into the bed, breathing hard. "It's going to take time," the therapist said gently. "There's nerve trauma. But you're strong. We'll get you there." Time. Sarah closed her eyes. Time meant she couldn't work. Time meant she couldn't earn. Time meant she had no control over her life. Except now, her life wasn't hers anymore. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo returned. He stood near the window while Sarah sat propped up in bed. "I spoke to the doctors," he said. "You'll be moved to a rehabilitation suite tomorrow." Sarah nodded slowly. Then she looked at him. "I want to see Toby." "You will," Lorenzo said. "He's doing well. His numbers are stable." She hesitated. "Can I talk to him?" Lorenzo took out his phone and handed it to her without a word. The call connected after 2 rings. "Sarah." Toby's voice came through, surprised and emotional. "Where are you? They told me you were hurt." "I'm okay," she said quickly, fighting tears. "I'm in the hospital, but I'm getting better." "They moved me to a new clinic," he continued. "Sarah, this place is incredible. They have specialists. They gave me a monitor that checks my sugar every minute." She glanced at Lorenzo. "I know," she said softly. There was a pause. "Did you win the lottery or something?" Toby asked. Sarah almost laughed. "Something like that." After the call ended, she handed the phone back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lorenzo gave a short nod. But Sarah didn't look away. "What happens when I'm better?" she asked. "You come home," he replied. "And then? You live your life." She held his gaze. "That's not my life," she said. "Your house. Your world. Your name. That's not me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lorenzo stepped closer to the bed. "You took 3 bullets for my son," he said. "That makes you part of my world whether you want it or not." His voice wasn't harsh. It was factual. Unmovable. Sarah looked down at the ring again. "I didn't do it for your world," she said quietly. "I did it because he's a child." Lorenzo studied her. Most people, when given wealth and protection, would feel lucky, grateful, excited. But Sarah looked like someone who had been handed a cage made of gold. "You're afraid," he said. She didn't deny it. "Yes." "Of me?" She hesitated. "Of losing myself." The words hung between them. For the first time, Lorenzo didn't have an immediate answer. Because in his world, people lost themselves all the time. Power changed people. Money changed people. Fear changed people. And now, Sarah Miller was standing at the edge of all 3. That evening, as the sun set outside the hospital windows, a nurse helped Sarah sit in a wheelchair for the first time. Her legs felt weak, unsteady. The hallway stretched long and quiet as she was slowly pushed forward. When they reached the rehabilitation wing, Sarah noticed something strange. 2 men in dark suits stood near the entrance. They weren't hospital staff. They nodded respectfully as she passed. Security. Not for the building. For her. Inside the private suite, the room looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical space. Fresh flowers. A sitting area. floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah stared at it. This wasn't recovery. This was protection. The nurse helped her settle into the bed. "Someone will be staying outside your door," she said gently. "Just in case you need anything." Sarah nodded slowly. After the nurse left, the room grew quiet. Too quiet. She rolled her wheelchair closer to the window and looked down at the city lights. Somewhere out there was her old apartment. Her old life. Her old self. Behind her, the door clicked softly as one of the guards took position outside. And for the first time since she woke up, Sarah realized something that made her chest tighten. She wasn't just being protected. She was being watched. And somewhere in the city, the people who sent that gunman were probably watching too. The night in the rehabilitation suite felt longer than any night Sarah had ever lived through. The city lights blinked outside the window, steady and distant, like a world she could see but no longer reach. Inside the room, everything was quiet. Too clean. Too comfortable. Too controlled. The kind of comfort money buys, the kind that reminds you someone else is paying for it. Sarah sat in the wheelchair, her hands resting on the arms, staring at the reflection of herself in the dark glass. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Pale. Thin. Hair pulled back loosely by a nurse. Hospital band still around her wrist. And the ring. That bright, heavy ring that didn't belong to her life. She turned it slowly. It caught the light again. A waitress from Queens doesn't wear a diamond like this. A waitress from Queens doesn't have armed guards outside her door. A waitress from Queens doesn't wake up married to a man like Lorenzo Caruso. The realization settled deeper in her chest. Her old life wasn't waiting for her anymore. And she wasn't sure if that felt like relief or loss. A soft knock broke the silence. Before she could answer, the door opened. Leo stepped inside. He was wearing a small hoodie and sneakers now, looking more like a normal kid instead of the tiny figure in a tuxedo from the gala. Behind him, one of the guards remained outside, the door left slightly open. Leo walked straight toward her. "I brought you something," he said. He held out a small paper bag. Sarah took it carefully. Inside was a sandwich, a juice box, and a small pack of crackers. She looked at him, surprised. "Hospital food is boring," he explained seriously. "I told the kitchen to make this." Sarah smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you," she said softly. Leo climbed onto the chair near the window and watched her as she took a small bite. For a moment, they just sat quietly together. Then he asked, "Are you going to live with us?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Leo looked down at his hands. "I hope you do," he murmured. Sarah waited. After a few seconds, he added, "The house is really big." There was a long pause. "And it's quiet," he finished. The way he said it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded lonely. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "Does your dad spend a lot of time working?" she asked gently. Leo nodded. "He leaves early. Sometimes I'm asleep when he comes back." Sarah looked at him more carefully now. Designer clothes. Private security. A home worth millions. And still, a little boy eating dinner alone most nights. Wealth didn't protect people from loneliness. Sometimes it made it worse. "Do you have friends over?" she asked. Leo shook his head. "Papa says it's safer if I stay home." Safer. That word again. The same word that had turned Sarah's life upside down. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Lorenzo stepped inside. His eyes moved immediately to Leo. "I told you not to come without security inside the room," he said calmly. The boy lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Lorenzo looked at Sarah, then at the half-eaten sandwich. For a moment, something softened in his expression. Then it was gone. "Leo, it's time." The boy slid off the chair. Before leaving, he looked back at Sarah. "Good night," he said quietly. "Good night," she replied. When the door closed behind him, the room felt bigger again. Lorenzo remained near the entrance. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "I'm not alone," Sarah replied. "There's a guard outside." "That's not the same." She studied him. "You're worried about him," she said. It wasn't a question. Lorenzo didn't deny it. "He doesn't sleep well," he admitted. "Since the shooting." Sarah nodded slowly. "He thinks it's his fault," Lorenzo continued. "He keeps asking if you're still hurting because of him." Sarah's heart sank. "Children carry guilt they don't understand," she said softly. There was a long silence. Then Lorenzo asked something unexpected. "You talk to him like you've done this before." Sarah looked down at her hands. "I raised my brother after our parents died," she said. "When Toby was sick, he used to blame himself too. Kids think everything is their fault." Lorenzo leaned slightly against the wall, listening. "He needs someone who talks to him like a child," she continued. "Not like a soldier." The words hung in the air. Lorenzo didn't react immediately. But the message reached him. Finally, he spoke. "He listens to you." Sarah met his eyes. "Because I don't treat him like something fragile," she said. "And I don't treat him like a responsibility." Lorenzo's expression tightened slightly. In his world, everything was responsibility. Protection. Security. Control. Love wasn't something he had ever been taught how to show. After a moment, he stepped closer to the window. "The doctors say you'll start walking therapy tomorrow," he said. Sarah nodded. "And after that?" "When you're stable," he answered, "you'll come home." She didn't argue this time. Instead, she asked quietly, "What's it like there?" Lorenzo looked out at the city lights before answering. "Safe." She waited. "That's all?" "Yes." Sarah studied his profile. For a man who controlled empires, who could buy anything, who could command anyone, safe was the only thing he offered. Not comfort, not happiness, just safety. After a moment, she spoke again. "Safety isn't the same as living." Lorenzo turned to look at her. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was something unspoken between them. Two people from completely different worlds. Both carrying responsibilities that had shaped their lives. Both protecting someone they loved more than themselves. "Finally," Lorenzo said quietly, "in my world, safety is the only reason people get to keep living." The room fell silent again. Outside, the guard shifted his position in the hallway. Inside, Sarah leaned back slightly in her chair, her body already tired from the day. Lorenzo moved toward the door. He paused before opening it. "There's something else," he said. Sarah looked up. "The investigation," he continued. "We found the man who hired the shooter." Her stomach tightened. "Who was it?" Lorenzo held her gaze. "Someone very powerful," he said slowly. Then his voice lowered. "And they just found out you survived." Sarah didn't sleep that night. The words stayed with her. "They just found out you survived." For the first time since waking up, the danger felt real, not like a distant story from Lorenzo's world, but something that could reach her. Reach Toby. Reach Leo. The city lights outside the window felt colder now. Morning came with quiet footsteps and careful voices. Physical therapy began early. The first attempt to stand was slow, painful, and humbling. Her legs trembled. Her back burned. But she stayed upright. Because somewhere inside her, something stronger than fear had already taken root. By the third day, Lorenzo returned with news. "They know who ordered it," he said. Sarah looked up from the parallel bars she was gripping. And it was Vincent Russo. The name meant nothing to her. But the tension in Lorenzo's voice did. "He runs a rival operation," Lorenzo continued. "He wanted leverage. Hurting my son would have broken me. And removing you now would remove the witness." Sarah sat down slowly. "So what happens?" Lorenzo's eyes were steady. "He made a mistake." That night, things moved quietly. There were no headlines, no police statements, no public drama. But in Lorenzo's world, messages traveled faster than news. Vincent Russo's businesses were shut down one by one. His allies distanced themselves overnight. His protection disappeared. By morning, he had surrendered himself to federal authorities, offering information in exchange for safety. Justice didn't always look the same in Lorenzo's world. But the threat was gone. When Lorenzo told Sarah, she didn't feel relief right away. She felt something softer. Closure. No more running. No more shadows watching from the dark. For the first time since the ballroom, she breathed without that tight weight in her chest. A week later, she took her first steps without assistance. Leo was there when it happened. He stood nearby, holding Optimus like a good luck charm. "You're walking," he said, eyes wide. Sarah smiled through the pain. "Slowly," she said. Leo grinned. Heroes walk slow after battles. That evening, Lorenzo came to her room earlier than usual. "The doctors are clearing you for discharge," he said. Sarah nodded. She had known this moment was coming. "The car will take you home tomorrow," he added. She looked at him carefully. "Home," she repeated. There was a quiet pause between them. Then she asked the question she had been carrying for days. "If I leave, if I decide this life isn't for me, will you let me go?" Lorenzo didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was calm. "You were never a prisoner." Sarah held his gaze. "And if I stay?" "Then you stay because you want to." That night, she didn't look at the ring. She looked at her phone. At the messages from Toby, updates from his new treatment, pictures of him smiling, healthier than she had seen him in years. She thought about the quiet apartment in Queens, the leaking ceiling, the constant fear. Then she thought about Leo, the lonely dinners, the quiet house, the way his face lit up when she walked into the room. The next morning, the car drove through tall iron gates and up a long winding drive. The Caruso estate stood ahead, massive, quiet, intimidating. But when the door opened, Leo ran out before the staff could stop him. "You're here," he shouted. Sarah barely had time to steady herself before he hugged her carefully around the waist. "I missed you," he said. Behind him, Lorenzo stood watching. Not controlling. Not commanding. Just waiting. Inside the house, things were different than she expected. Yes, it was large. Beautiful. Perfect. But it was also empty. No photos. No noise. No warmth. That evening, Sarah placed the first framed picture in the living room. A simple one. Leo holding Optimus. Toby standing beside him during a visit. All three of them smiling. When Lorenzo saw it, he stopped. The house had never held memories before. Only security. Only order. "Is that okay?" Sarah asked quietly. Lorenzo looked at the photo for a long moment. "Yes," he said. Days turned into weeks. Sarah continued therapy. Leo started sleeping through the night. Toby visited more often, his health improving every month. The house slowly changed. Laughter began to echo in rooms that had been silent for years. Dinner was no longer eaten alone. And Lorenzo, He began coming home earlier. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. One evening, months later, Sarah stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sunset painted everything gold. Lorenzo joined her. "You never asked me something," he said. "What?" "Why I said you were my wife." Sarah smiled faintly. "I figured it was for the hospital." He shook his head. "That was part of it." He looked out at the skyline. "But when you covered my son with your body, you didn't know his name. You didn't know mine. You didn't know what world you were stepping into." He turned toward her. "In that moment, you were the bravest person in that room." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I wasn't brave," she said softly. "I just saw a child who needed someone." Lorenzo's voice lowered. "That's what real strength is." There was a long silence. Then he reached for her hand. This time, the gesture wasn't about protection. It was about partnership. The emotional peak came quietly, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Love didn't come from wealth. It came from sacrifice. From showing up. From choosing someone again and again. Months later, at a charity event in the same ballroom where everything began, Sarah stood beside Lorenzo, not as a guest, not as a survivor, as his partner. When a donor asked her how she went from waitress to this life, Sarah smiled gently. "I didn't marry money," she said. "I married a family. And a little boy who needed someone to stand in front of him." Because in the end, her life hadn't changed because of diamonds. It changed because one poor girl chose kindness over fear. And one powerful man learned that strength doesn't come from control. It comes from love. The truth is simple. Money can build houses. Power can control people. But only kindness can build a home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances. And tell me in the comments, which country or region are you watching from?